Tonight, the evolving art of the legendary Richard Serra and the artistic magic of Steve Cohen. I'm Mike Schneider, and this is Night Talk. We welcome you back to Night Talk and welcome Steve Cohen, the millionaire's magician, to the program. He has performed for the biggest names on Wall Street, for the White House Correspondents' Dinner, even the late great scientist and skeptic Carl Sagan, also the author of Win the Crowd. Steve Cohen, good of you to join us.
Hey, thanks so much. Happy to be here.
How does one become a magician?
Well, the typical answer is to say that I got tricked into it. But actually, my uncle my great uncle was born in 1901. He met Houdini when he was a young man and learned magic from the master, and he passed it on to me. So it's been kind of a lineage in my family.
How old were you when you first recalled the interactions on the subject of magic with your grandfather?
When I was 6 years old.
6 years old?
Yeah. It's kind of, you get the magic bug very early on, and most of the magicians I know who are in the big time also started pretty young.
Do you remember what those conversations, did it start with him showing you a trick, or?
Yeah, well, you know, every time, I grew up in Westchester County, you know, about an hour north of here, and so my uncle would come to the family parties, and he'd set up a little table, and he'd have all the children gather around, and he'd do tricks for all of us. And after the tricks were over, all the kids would just kind of scatter off and do other things. But I would stick around, and he noticed that I had some more interest than the other ones. And he would take me off to the corner and show me a couple of tricks and say, hey, well, here's how they're done. And it just was so intriguing to me. You
were good at it immediately, do you think, or were you just fascinated by it and became good through learning your craft? I think as a combination. You know,
people always ask me, like, well, how do you get to do what you do so well? And I always try to flip it by saying, well, imagine if you were asking that to a concert pianist. You know, is it something they were born with, or is it something that they developed? And I think that for some people, it's a combination of both. You know, you end up having some innate ability that luckily you learn to nurture. So it's a combination of the two.
The first trick that you did for pay, what was the first? Yeah.
Well, I did my first paid performance when I was 10 years old. I got the chance to perform, believe it or not, at kids' birthday parties. I was 10, the kids were 4, and you know, I get a big whopping $25 as my payment.
That's not bad
in the 70s. That's actually, for a 10-year-old kid, is a lot of money. It could buy a lot of, you know, M&Ms or whatever, you know, at the time. But the first show that I did, fortunately, it was kind of a success. You know, you expect to have the first show being a big flop, but this one, it went pretty smoothly. I think that the biggest trick that I did at the time was I would take some colorful silk handkerchiefs, like red and yellow and blue, stick them inside of a little tube that was clear plastic, and then cover it with another handkerchief. And when I whipped it away, it was filled with multiple colored lollipops. So if you want to make an impression on 4-year-old kids, give out candy.
Oh, yeah, lollipops, absolutely.
Yeah, so
put them in a tube where they got to go crazy to try to get to them.
Yeah.
And you were just kind of like smitten with the idea of doing it at that point on, I guess. That first performance kind of lights the fire.
Exactly. I saw Doug Henning, remember, the hippie magician from the 70s?
Sure.
I saw him on television, and I remember on one of my family parties, I guess it must have been, up in Westchester, I saw him levitate a woman on television. I just thought that was the greatest thing ever, and I knew from that point forward that no matter what I was going to do with my life, that I wanted to have magic as part of it.
Have you, in fact, ever levitated a woman?
Not levitated a woman, no.
Yeah. Other things?
Well, we can't talk about that on television.
So how do you take it from being a 10-year-old doing parties to the level of success that you've had?
Oh, well, that's a nice question, and thanks for that. You know, one thing leads to another. I was always obsessed with magic, and when I was going through school and even through college, I was doing magic shows for pay. And it fed the business. I mean, I was always thinking of it as a business. I started off putting ads in the local papers and the penny saver newspapers, and would get calls from people all around the county to perform at their events. And most of these were also other children's birthday parties. So I got, I kind of grew accustomed to performing for wild audiences.
Because there's nothing much more wild than
a bunch of kids. And now that I'm a dad,
up on birthday cake.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Now that I'm a dad, like I know really what's going on behind the scenes. But also what I learned during that time was the structure of how to make an entertaining show. And if you can entertain children, when you think about it, even adults, we're really just big kids. So I've had the chance to perform for, like you mentioned, some of the most successful people in the world. And I see these billionaires who I have incredible respect for as businessmen become children again. You see their eyes just light up, and they just kind of throw away all of the facade and everything, just become that inner child. And for me, it's so fulfilling.
Is it intimidating at first to be playing to a crowd of super achievers like that, people who are kind of hardened to the realities of the world?
Yeah, well, I had a great experience about a month ago. I performed for Barry Diller. He came to my show at the Waldorf-Astoria, which is where I do my weekly show. It's been running now for 7 years. And anyway, so Barry Diller came to the show, and he said, "Oh, yeah, I really like this." And he invited me then to do a show at his home in Beverly Hills. And then another couple of weeks later, down in Florida, in Key Largo. And I'll tell you about this Key Largo event. It was just extraordinary. It was the Interactive Corp annual retreat. So there's all the IAC top executives there. And I look out into the audience, and I'm the keynote final night of the event speaker performer. And over here is Barry Diller, over here is Jack Welch, and over here is Michael Eisner and his wife. And I think to myself, okay, so those are like, some pretty heavy hitters in the world, not just in on this boat or in this location, but here we are, it's pretty extraordinary. And the key is not to become intimidated, because when you deal with anybody, if you put yourself into the mode of kind of looking up to them, then they're going to put themselves into the mode of looking down to you. And they put on their celebrity face or their businessman face, or whatever the face is. There's a face that they've learned to use almost as a defense mechanism. So I like to just circumvent that altogether. And I talk about this also in my book, Win the Crowd, is how to just treat people like people, and then they almost don't know what to do.
Right, but there's a lot of psychology involved here, isn't there?
Exactly, and magic is all, aside from the sleight of hand, which of course takes years of practice to master. And I'll be happy to show you something if you like.
Absolutely. We'll go after the break. I want you to come back and show a couple.
Yeah, I'd love to show you some fun things. But also, it's the psychology. It's the game of cat and mouse that you're playing with the mind. And for me, magic is not only interesting on the technical level, but on the planning level. And you might have seen one of the popular magic movies that came out last summer, like The Prestige or The Illusionist.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the films, they kind of show the thought process that goes behind the magic show.
Right.
And for me, that's what it's all about. It's coming up with these psychological discrepancies and making them still fly by people so that they feel like they're just lulled into it being normal.
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take a break. We'll play like we're normal for a moment, then come back and a couple of tricks from the Millionaire's Magician, Steve Cohen.
You're playing poker against me, which I wouldn't advise, by the way. And I want you to imagine those 5 cards make up a poker hand. Please think of what you suspect is the best card in your hand, the most valuable card. Have you got that card? Close the cards up, and please send that thought from your eyes into mine. Oh, you're good. You're really focusing. I'm seeing a large club. Does that make sense to you? It's the ace. The ace of clubs? Wait, but did you almost think of a different card?
Perhaps, but no. Ace.
He says no, but he means yes.
Back once again with Steve Cohen, the Millionaire's Magician. Parlor magic is the term that's frequently used. What does that mean exactly?
Well, in the old days, we're talking 19th century, in Europe especially, magicians used to be invited into people's homes, kind of like, well, the way that Mark Twain would have been invited into a home here in the United States to do an after-dinner presentation. And the idea is that you're only a few inches away from the performer, and you're entirely engaged with the show, because it's not a show like on television where there's a screen between you and the entertainment. You're actually a part of the show. The maximum number of people in the living room would maybe be about 30 people or 40 people. And it was a huge success. And there were magicians in Europe who, specifically in Vienna and also in Paris, who were household names because of this type of performance. And I created a show called Chamber Magic, which I thought would be a nice way to recreate that here in New York.